blood of a president on my hand. My God. So when he took Mrs. Kennedy's hand, she had blood on her gloves, and it got onto his hand, and just as something that must have just been incredible. Well, at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, on November 22nd, 1963, President John Fitzgerald Kennedy was officially pronounced dead. At 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, on November 22nd, 1963, President John Fitzgerald Kennedy was pronounced dead. We're going to talk about this a little bit later, but after the president's body was placed in a casket, Mrs. Kennedy slipped off her wedding ring, and according to Sergeant Duger, who was now in Trauma 1, quote, she tried to put it on his finger, but it wouldn't go past the knuckle. She asked me to try, but I couldn't get the ring on either. We left it there on the first knuckle. I was having trouble with my vision, tears coming down. She cried just a little, then quickly gained her composure. Now, we got to go back. At 1:05, what was going on in that cabinet plane every 30 seconds after 30 minutes of silence? Wayside, stand by. 30 seconds, remember? Wayside, stand by. Back on that cabinet plane. At 1:05 p.m., back aboard that cabinet plane that was headed back to Honolulu, the voice from the White House Situation Room changed from wayside, stand by, to wayside, Lancer is dead. So it went from wayside, stand by, to wayside, Lancer is dead. What's wayside? Secret Service code name for Pierre Salinger. What's Lancer? Secret Service name for JFK. Lace was Mrs. Kennedy's Secret Service code name. So it went from wayside, stand by, in other words, Pierre Salinger, stand by for news, to wayside, Lancer is dead. So it was at 1:05 p.m. that the people on that plane knew that President Kennedy had died from his gunshot wounds. At 1:10 p.m., now I bet this was hard. Oh, even bugs me. At 1:10 p.m., Kenneth O'Donnell walked 100 feet from Trauma Room 1 to the room where Vice President Johnson was being held. At 1:10 p.m., Kenneth O'Donnell, one of Kennedy's closest friends, walked 100 feet to a room where Vice President Johnson was being held for safety concerns. And he walked in the room and he said to Vice President Johnson, "The President is dead, Mr. President." I bet that was hard. The President is dead, Mr. President. Acknowledging the fact that John Kennedy was dead and that he was the new President of the United States, although he has not been sworn in. And we'll talk about that later. So at 1:10 p.m., Kenneth O'Donnell walks 100 feet to a room where Vice President Johnson is being held, and he says to Vice President Johnson, "The President is dead, Mr. President." The man who officially announced the death of President Kennedy to the world was Malcolm Kilduff. The man who officially announced the death of President Kennedy to the world was Malcolm Kilduff. Anybody want to ask? Who would normally announce that? Pierre Salinger, but he can't because he's on a plane heading back to Honolulu. So what do you think position does Malcolm Kilduff hold? He's the Assistant White House Press Secretary. And he was sent on the trip to Dallas because Pierre Salinger was sent on the trip to Japan for the trading conference. So it's going to be this guy that no one thought would have any news to give, really. It's going to give the most important news in the history of this country possible. He was the Assistant White House Press Secretary, and he was in Dallas because Salinger was with the other cabinet members on the trip to Japan. Well, Malcolm Kilduff was nervous, and he went to Kenneth O'Donnell and he said, quote, "Kenny, this is a terrible time to have to approach you on this, but the world has got to know President Kennedy is dead." And O'Donnell's response to Kilduff was, "Well, you're going to have to make the announcement. Go ahead, but you better check it with Mr. Johnson." Okay, so Kilduff's coming to Kenneth O'Donnell and saying, "Listen, we got to announce this. And he's saying, well, you go ahead and announce it, but you better check with Mr. Johnson before you do, because why? He's technically the new president. So, this is kind of an interesting story. Vice President Johnson, who they were kind of hiding out in that room, he didn't even know the president was pronounced dead. It was Malcolm Kilduff who actually informed the vice president that the president had died. He was like one of the last ones to know, Vice President Johnson, because they had him in a room protecting him. Do you understand that? Making sure that they didn't know what this was about. They didn't know if this was a conspiracy to kill all government officials or what. So,
didn't you just say
that?
yeah, but that doesn't mean he was officially, he wasn't officially told that. That's what he said to him. But nobody had come to him and said, hey, the president's dead. All Kenneth O'Donnell said, no, but he's not official. That's what I'm saying. So Johnson really, all he did could assume that was the case. So nobody had ever come to him and said, hey, listen, I got to tell you something here. The doctors or no one. Only person that said anything to him was Kenneth O'Donnell, who simply said, what? President's dead, Mr. President. Is he gonna take that word, do you think, or is he gonna wait? Would you take it? He didn't.
I have a question. What
Hey,
makes
didn't.
Malcolm more suitable to tell him?
Because he was the White House press secretary. And no, but that's part of the whole thing. This was an absolute chaotic mess in there. You'll see it when we watch a video on it. So really, officially, Lyndon Johnson was one of the last people at Parkland Hospital to receive this notification. Now, Kilduff, once he talked to Johnson, he said, Mr. I don't know what he called him, he said, do you want me to announce Kennedy's death to the public? Because he still hadn't done it. And Johnson said, no, I only want you to announce this to the public after I leave the hospital. Okay? He did not want it. This is what he said. He said, I think I'd better get out of here before you announce it. We don't know whether this is a worldwide conspiracy, whether they're after me as well as they were after President Kennedy. So he wanted the hell out of the hospital, and he wanted to get back on Air Force One before anybody announced anything so he would be safe, and that was probably smart. So Kilduff asked Lyndon Johnson for his approval to announce Kennedy's death to the public. Johnson ordered that the announcement of the president's death be made only after he had left the hospital, and said, I think I had better get out of here before you announce it. We don't know whether this is a worldwide conspiracy, whether they are after me as well as they were after President Kennedy. Well, Kilduff stays back at Parkland Hospital, and when he receives confirmation that Johnson was back on Air Force One, he made preparations to announce the president's death to the press. And they assembled in a nurse's classroom at Parkland Hospital. That's where all the press, they brought all the press into a nurse's classroom at Parkland Hospital. Now, what time did the president die? What time did the airplane get notification? 1:05. What time did O'Donnell go in and talk to the president? 1:10. At 1:33 p.m., this is Central Standard Time, this is what Assistant White House Press Secretary stated to the press. At 1:33 p.m., Malcolm Kilduff stated the following. He said, quote, President John F. Kennedy died at approximately 1 o'clock Central Standard Time today here in Dallas. He died of a gunshot wound to the brain. I have no other details regarding the assassination of the president. Okay, I'll read it one more time if you like. He stated at 1:33 p.m., excuse me, President John F. Kennedy died at approximately 1 o'clock Central Standard Time today here in Dallas. He died of a gunshot wound to the brain. I have no other details regarding the assassination of the president. At 1:38 p.m., CBS correspondent Walter Cronkite announces on national television the following to the American people. You don't have to write this down, but there's a great point to this. So at approximately 1:38 p.m., CBS News correspondent Walter Cronkite announced on national television the following to the American people. Now, this was interesting because this guy was probably considered one of the most stoic, most respected, serious reporters in the history of our country to this day. He says, from Dallas, Texas, the flash apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time a half hour ago. As he finished that part, he began to weep, or not weep so much, but tear up and show emotion, which was absolutely unbelievable for this guy. And he catches himself and he clears his throat, and you'll see it on video, and he continues by saying, Vice President Johnson has left the hospital in Dallas, but we do not to where he has proceeded. Presumably, he will be taking the oath of office shortly and become the 36th President of the United States. But he, right in the middle of that, was so caught with emotion, which media people never are, that he had to stop and compose himself for just a second. The most stoic reporter in the history of this country. And when he was asked about that later, about that little bit of a flub up, so to speak, this is what he said. He said, it's an interesting thing about us news people. We are much like doctors and nurses and firemen and police. In the midst of tragedy, our professional drive takes over and dominates our emotions. We move almost like automobiles to get the job done. The time for an emotional reaction must wait. I was doing fine in that department until it was necessary to pronounce the words that stuck in my throat. A sob wanted to replace them. A gulp or two squashed the sob, which metamorphosized into tears forming in the corner of my eyes. I fought back the emotion and regained my professionalism, but it was touch and go there for a few seconds before I could continue. When you see this, you won't believe it, because this guy was just the most stoic reporter ever, and he had to stop and compose himself. Okay, moving on. Who have we kind of forgotten about here? Governor Conolly. Yeah, nobody's even, said much about this. Now, this is an interesting story. As far as Governor Conolly's condition, the news was obviously much brighter. The man that was in charge of Governor Conolly's emergency care was Dr. James Red Duke. Dr. James Red Duke was the man in charge of Governor Conolly's care. Now, I want to just tell you, we have an open space on the board here, because just yesterday, after looking for many years, I found a signature of James Red Duke. When I get it, we'll put it right in that open spot. Yeah, that was Earl Cabell, the mayor of Dallas. I got that, by the way, just put it right there. So we're making progress here. Be nice to me, maybe I'll give you one. Now, as far as Governor Conolly, the bullet, whichever one it was, we still talked about that, had punctured the governor's lung. Remember, shattered his wrist, broke his 5th rib. He certainly had some injuries. Now, this was kind of interesting. All of the attention at this time was really being placed on who? President Kennedy. And only because a senior medical student by the name of Bill Scroggie, only because he had stumbled upon the governor unattended because of all the attention that was being given to the president, did maybe Conolly live. They kind of put him a little bit on the back shelf, and left him for a little bit. And Scroggie came by. He was simply a medical student there, senior medical student, and he observed Conolly and Conolly's respiratory distress. And when he noticed that Conolly was struggling, breathing, he alerted Dr. James Duke and said, hey, boy, somebody better get over here and pay attention to the governor because he's really struggling breathing. He was suffering from respiratory distress. And Dr. Duke immediately intervened and saved Conolly's life. But anybody ever heard of Bill Scroggie before today? I mean, I'm telling you, you're getting some good information here. If it's not for this senior medical student who comes across Conolly struggling, breathing, he may not survive this whole thing, okay? So finally, they take care of Conolly, and at 3:50 p.m., Dr. Robert Shaw briefed the press on the condition of Governor Conolly. 3:50 p.m., same day, November 22nd, 1963, Dr. Robert Shaw briefs the president on the condition of Governor Connolly. 350, 50. 350.
Can you tell the president?
Press, sorry. And this is what he said. The condition of the governor is quite satisfactory in view of the injuries he has sustained. We believe he was in a sitting position, shot from above. We believe this is all one bullet. So whether it was the one that hit Kennedy or another one bullet did all the damage to Governor Connolly. And I have a little bit of trouble with doing all the damage to everybody, but it's still possible. Okay, I'm going to show you a quick video on a motorcade scene from the movie Kennedy, and then we'll be done for the day. Tomorrow, we will meet in the Commons, and we will have an open note test tomorrow on the material that we talked about covering the scene in Dallas. Okay? Open note test tomorrow.